Today's episode is being brought to you by Untarnished, Reclaiming My Self-Worth Through God's Untainted Love. Untarnished is a compelling memoir and simple self-help guide where I give you the inside scoop on my personal journey and provide coping strategies to help others heal from their past. You can download a free copy of the first chapter by heading over to donnacherie.com/untarnished. You're listening to Untarnished Moments, the podcast that helps you shine through life challenges and move past self-defeat into victory. I'm your host, Donna Cherie. Let's get into today's show. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Untarnished Moments. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you have found this information helpful and beneficial to you, share it with someone. Don't hold this information to yourself, but share it with your friends, share it with your loved ones, and just to anyone who you might feel this information would be helpful to. So today I have a special guest. Her name is Reshanda Yates, and I'm so happy to have her on the show. Welcome, Reshanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I am a food trigger specialist, and I help smart, ambitious women to regain their power over food triggers so that they can have more energy and better mental performance. And, I came to this work, actually the work chose me. I was on a journey of weight loss and found myself struggling with binges. And in looking for solutions for myself, because I had been struggling with binge eating for decades, I realized that I was just trying to do the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same results. And one day it just struck me, why don't I just stop? Because at this point, I'd just rather be happy than continue going down this path. And that led me to being a part of a community that was doing things differently. And one day I had seen a post a woman had written in the group about her binge eating, and I really resonated with it. And I sat with it for like a week, came back and responded to her post, which led to me being on a guest on a major podcast, because that community was part of that podcast. And anyway, long story short, so many people resonated with it that it ended up being their most downloaded podcast at that time. The comments were flooded with, hey, how can we reach Reshanda? And so it made me realize that this was something that I could help people with. And so that's how I got started, using my own story and success to help others.
Okay, awesome. And then what exactly is binge eating?
That is a great question. And binge eating, there is a clinical definition of it. One disclaimer here that I do want to mention is that I'm not a licensed therapist. And so my background isn't from that. I definitely come to it from an experiential, lived experience. So what I talk about is things that, the average person could relate to. And I really talk about it in terms of being disordered eating rather than an eating disorder. So I do want to make that distinction because it's my disclaimer, And the way that I describe binge eating is there are a few characteristics that usually go along with that. And so one of them is it's really related to your feelings and your mental processes. So one aspect of it is brain-based, it's the habitual aspect of it. And a lot of times the feelings associated with that habit are feelings of feeling out of control. And then there is the component of feeling shame around it. A lot of times people who struggle with binge and emotional eating, they feel not only like they can't stop, but they feel like, they have to hide it. They have to do it in secret. A lot of times they do it in isolation. They do it alone a lot of times. And this was all my experience, by the way. So I would, I would binge after work, for example, in the evening. And it would be a way of comforting myself. But then I would hide the evidence from my husband. I wouldn't allow him to know that I had eaten all this food. And so I would like hide it in the trash, and I would like cover up the trash and the evidence of it. So those are the kinds of things that are usually associated with binge eating when it is a struggle. Now, that's not to say that, like there's the aspect of volume associated with it as well, as in, if you eat a large volume of food at one time, that can be considered a binge. But there is a certain portion of people who struggle with it. And usually that's where the shame is associated with it as well. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I know that we're talking about eating, but also like when it comes to not necessarily drinking alcohol, but like if somebody was drinking like a 6-pack of Coke at one time, would that be considered a binge as well, or is that something that's different?
I mean, I would consider that a binge. It is, one serving size of a Coke would probably be what, a can.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone drank an entire 6-pack at once, yes, that could be considered a binge. But the distinction that I want to make, and I guess this could best be described with an example. So my husband, I like to use him as examples because he is someone who has never really struggled with his weight. And he generally doesn't think about food. He doesn't put a whole lot of thought into what he eats or how he eats. Yet, when you look at the way he eats, you might describe how he eats as a binge. So, for example, he eats all his meals in one sitting. He waits until the evening, which I could never. I don't know how he does this, but he waits until the evening to eat, right? And, he'll do things like eat an entire pint of ice cream at one time, or, so he eats in a way that some people might look at it from the outside and say, oh, that looks like a binge. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. But that's not so much the point. The point is, does how you eat work for you, or does it not work for you? Like I said, my husband, he's never struggled with his weight. He's always been a lean person. And if he does gain a little weight, it always just comes back down and normalizes. And he always move. Like if he eats a little bit too much, even if he feels kind of after, he just moves on from it. It does not bother him. Compare that to myself and how I used to be. If I sat down and ate a little too much ice cream, okay, it might not even be an entire pint, but it just might be more than, what I think I should have eaten. I will beat myself up, where I used to. I would beat myself up about that for weeks on end. And then I would just go into this whole spiral of obsessing about it in my mind, shaming myself about it, trying to control myself, trying to overcorrect that quote unquote mistake, making myself miserable and potentially triggering myself to eat even more in the following days. So I would end up in this battle within myself. So that's why I like to talk about this distinction a lot, because it's really not about the external food that's eaten so much as the internal experience of what are you thinking and feeling about yourself when you've eaten that food. So, it's almost a moot point of how much food is a binge.
Okay, that makes sense.
That was a really good question, though. I'm glad you asked that, because I think that what you don't want to end up doing is having people think that they're doing something wrong just because they ate a certain volume of food, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I went to a wedding last weekend and I had a piece of cake and I ate some mashed potatoes. But it was fine, just one serving. So.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And that's really why I do the work that I do, is because there's a certain sect of the population that just can't do that for themselves for whatever reason.
Absolutely. Going back to your journey a little bit and how you arrived to this point, walk us through that day when you basically said, enough is enough and I'm going to make a serious change. Where were you? How did you feel? And what was like the ultimate thing?
Man, there's so many things that I could share with you, but I'll share with you one story that was kind of what I call my rock bottom moment. And so this was a situation where I had been really doing what I would consider at that time pretty well with my eating. I felt like I was managing my eating well. I felt like I was, really the words I would have used at the time was I was controlling my eating really well. I had gone for a certain period of time, maybe it was weeks, maybe it was months, without having binged. And I was sitting in an apartment in an Airbnb with a friend who was visiting from out of town. And she had gone to the grocery store and gotten like, a little pizza, and she had baked some cookies, and we were sitting in her room with her mom. Her mom was there too. And we were just chatting and we were eating. And, I was really thinking to myself, like, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I'm not overeating. And she offered me seconds. And I was like, no, thank you. And I just felt very proud of myself for that. I remember. And the funny thing is, I left that dinner and I was driving for whatever reason my husband's truck. It's a big work like utility van. And for a reason that at the time I couldn't understand, I got on my phone and got on the Domino's pizza app and ordered pizza and then proceeded to go home and eat the pizza. And I ordered like extra stuff too, like dessert and all this stuff. And the next morning, it hit me. It's like I had clarity. I saw myself in that moment and I said, wait a minute, this makes no sense. The fact that I did that was completely irrational. Why would I leave dinner and go eat more food? Why would I turn down seconds and then go and eat more food? And that's the day that I realized something wasn't working. Like there was a disconnect somewhere. And it caused me to make significant changes. The first of which was to stop trying to do it by myself, because I realized I had a blind spot that I wasn't seeing.
And then after that, I know you mentioned you got involved with the community, but how did you come across that? Did you do research or somebody told you about it? And, what were some of the steps you took once you got into that community?
Yeah. So the way that I discovered the community was I started off by trying to go to therapy, which I think, a lot of people try this. And a lot of people have had the same experience that I had. I went to therapy. I tried to talk about it. I tried to understand what was happening. I analyzed it. I became a lot more aware, but yet I wasn't stopping what I was doing. And so it actually made it even more frustrating, right? So it was my therapist who suggested, hey, why don't you try Overeaters Anonymous? And that was a huge thing for me because it led me to, like you said, it led me to a community. And the biggest thing that did for me is to start to really let go of the shame, because I never realized how much the shame was actually driving my behavior at that time. And, one of my favorite authors, Brené Brown, who's also a big part of my journey and my healing, but she talks about shame can't survive the light. And so what that community did was provide me with other people who were also saying, yes, like this is an experience that I have. You're not crazy. Or if you are, at least I'm crazy with you, So it really gave me that sense of, okay, like, oh my God, like I'm not alone. That was the biggest thing that did for me.
I'm just thinking about just those words, I'm not alone. says a lot, and it's so comforting to so many people when they do come to that point and realization, like, I'm not the only one who's experiencing this. And then you can let those walls of shame just just move away from you, so, and then really start to move forward.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
after that, what were some additional steps that you took to overcome binge eating? Because I mean, I'm sure you were at home, and this had to become like a lifestyle change, and you had to build up some consistency. So, what were some of the things that you started or that you continued to do?
Yes. Okay. So definitely it was a journey, right? And it was not linear. And I do want to make that clear. Like, it's not a linear path, and it's not really a matter of looking for the right way of eating. So that's where I want to back up a little bit. So one of the biggest mistakes that I made and that I see a lot of people making is to try and solve the problem by, finding the perfect diet or the quote unquote right way of eating. And what this does is it fosters this sense of, oh, I'm going to find the magic way of eating that's going to solve the problem. But then it might work for a little while, but then when it stops working, now you're thinking, okay, either I failed or I haven't found the right way of eating yet. And so a lot of us get stuck in this trap of, doing well for a period of time, but then falling back into old habits. And then over time, making this idea that, okay, it's me. Like, no matter what I do, nothing works. And, I just am not a person who can eat, X, Y, and Z foods. We start making it that, oh, I just need to stay away from chocolate or pizza or whatever. We think that we have to, keep ourselves from our favorite food. So one of the biggest things that I did from the beginning that is it's going to sound counterintuitive, but I actually introduced foods that I had once thought were restricted, like that would make me gain weight. So I reintroduced to my diet potatoes and rice. Now, this is only, I want to make another disclaimer that this is just what worked for me. That does not mean that everybody should run out and introduce potatoes and rice into their diet, right? Please, like, make sure that you do your own research, talk to your physician, work with a registered dietitian to understand like what your body specifically needs. Because I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, we're all different, but this is just what worked for me. So I reintroduced potatoes and rice. Now, the background of that is I had been excluding them from my diet for absolutely no good reason, right? Like, I had eliminated these foods with no allergies, no pre-existing conditions like that would cause me to need to eliminate those foods. So I reintroduced them. And what it allowed me to do was to feel more satiety, not only physically, but also psychologically. And this was a huge thing for me because before I had really felt just this enormous sense of deprivation all the time in my life and feeling, this cyclical relationship between psychological deprivation and physical deprivation. And so they fed on each other. And this caused me to always be craving, and so I was always in that state of fighting myself. So when I reintroduced these foods, a number of really interesting things happened. Number one was I actually saw a reduce in my binges by about 80%.
Oh, wow.
Meaning I was binging daily, and all of a sudden now those binges were reduced to maybe just like 1 or 2 times a week. The next thing is I gradually released 28 pounds just from that one change alone. So imagine, like, I flipped my mindset from taking things away to what can I add? And this allowed me to actually release weight naturally. Weight that I have never gained back since that time, which was about 2016, 2017. And it allowed me to really shift how it was a paradigm shift for me because I started to notice that something about the way that I was thinking was causing my behaviors. And that right there was the invaluable lesson that I learned from my experience, because then from then on, I took that lesson to create massive transformation in my life on every level. So, just to kind of distill down back to your question of what did I do from there? The number one thing I did was I stopped thinking about what I needed to eliminate, and I started thinking about what can I add to my meals that will support me, support me in feeling my best. So that would be a big takeaway, I think, for everyone.
Wow, that's awesome. And I'm always amazed too at just our minds, and if we can just switch, make a simple switch, how much we can just transform our lives and do a new habit. And that's even with eating and how we see ourselves and how we think. It's so powerful. So you just from doing that one thing that you mentioned, you lost 28 pounds gradually. And I know one of the things that you mentioned, like, outside and that you share on your social media and just like within your progress, is that you lost 60 pounds and you
Right.
were able to just change how you saw yourself. So how long did it take you to lose those 60 pounds?
That's a good question. I actually have never thought about that. So I'm thinking back now, counting back to, I guess, 2018 is when I discovered 2018, 2019, maybe. So I guess that would have been 3 or 4 years, it seems like.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it was definitely a gradual process for me, right?
Yes.
And that was what I needed. I needed it
Yeah.
to be gradual.
Absolutely. I'm learning this as well for myself, like because I've tried diets in the past and I've lost weight, but then I gain more weight back. But I'm learning that when you make those gradual changes and you do it consistently over time, it's not necessarily about losing 60 pounds in 1 month, but it's making those lifestyle changes is what matters most. So not the fact that you can do it in 4 months or this short period amount of time, but that you can consistently keep doing it and then keeping the weight off, or, continue to eat better.
Exactly. And one of the big things that I challenge women with when they work with me is, what's causing you to need to lose weight immediately? And when you really look at that, that will tell you so much. Like there's so much lessons to be learned from that. Because what I discovered when I started asking myself this question, like, why do I need to lose it right now? That's when I started to really get down to the deeper, like that stuff that really drives your decisions in life. And that really gets down to like, how much do you really accept yourself? How much do you really and truly love yourself? Because what I've discovered is that so many women, don't think that they're good enough the way that they are, and this is what causes that, like that desperation almost to just lose the weight immediately, which then just sets us up, in that cycle.
Absolutely. And also too, with like just the things that people say to us when we're growing up about how we should look, or, that there's a certain standard of look. And I know this is something that you touch on as well. I don't know when it happened, but you mentioned that, and hopefully I say this right, but when they said when your finger and your thumb can touch around your waist like that, then that's the standard.
That's so crazy. Yeah. That was a book from the 80s, and it was like geared towards teen girls. Can you imagine? And yeah, and I read that when I was at a very impressionable age. And it was the book, the quote was, try to touch your fingertips and your thumbs around your waist. And if you can't reach, then you have quote unquote work to do. Right. And so, and that stuck. It's crazy. Like you said, the thoughts that we have, that thought stuck. And it was on a loop, and I didn't even know it was on a loop, to the point where it became part of my subconscious programming. I just thought that I was not thin enough. And that translated to I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not valuable. Like, which translates to like, what do I have to contribute, And so it really did shape a big part of my identity over the years. And the funny thing is, it's not just those stories about like what we should look like that come from the outside, but it's also like our family of origin. And what's interesting is I also had this other message. I had these mixed messages within my family where, there was a narrative passed down from my mom's side of the family where they would say things like, okay, this is just how we're built, meaning that just not sugarcoating it, meaning we're overweight. Like that's what that meant, because, a lot of my mom's side of the family struggled with our weight, and trying to be helpful, saying things like, you know what, big is beautiful. That is just the way that we are. And just kind of putting the story in my mind about this is my genetics, like this is my genetic destiny, at the same time, seeing my mom desperately try to lose weight herself. And so there was that mixed message also. But, the bottom line is like, there are these messages, and the more that we can be aware of them, the more we can be free from them, and we can be free from them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think too, oftentimes as women, we get so caught up with what the scale displays that we get discouraged if we're not at a certain weight. But what should we be focusing more on instead of the readings on the scale?
That's a great question. So I would say that shift your focus from what the scale says to how are you feeling? And here's why I say that. The number one mistake that women who struggle with binge eating make, and this is not just about binge eating, this is really about a lot of things, but the number one mistake is looking at the external circumstances to drive how you feel instead of the other way around. When we focus on how we're feeling on the inside and let that be our guide to how we behave, that's when we can actually move the needle on the behaviors that we want to see. So instead of focusing on, the scale went up 5 pounds today, focus on like, how do I feel after a meal? Like, how do I feel at the end of the day? For example, when you eat foods that don't satisfy you, that don't serve you in some way, and you're doing that on a consistent basis, that is probably going to be yielding outcomes that you're not wanting in your life. And yet, one of the things that we do is we try to avoid that feeling. And so the avoidance of that feeling is what is driving us back into the very behavior that is giving us the outcomes that we don't want. So it's not a matter of like focusing on the scale or trying to control the food. It's a matter of embodying. It's being embodied. It's really a matter of shifting our focus from the outside to the inside. Because when we are looking at the scale, that is just another type of distraction from how do I feel on the inside? So many women who struggle with emotional eating are actually trying to get away from their internal feelings, from feelings of anxiety, from feelings of unworthiness, from feelings of shame, or whatever their internal world is that's painful or uncomfortable. And so all of the external things that we're doing, like trying to, control our weight, trying to control our eating, all those things are really just distractions.
If a person does decide to look within and they recognize a variety of feelings, whether it be anxiety or feelings of unworthiness or shame, what can they do to start fixing their self-image and dealing with that stuff that's internal?
Sure. So there's 3 big steps that I would suggest that they would take. These steps come from the embodiment method, which is a process that I created to help women to stop emotional eating. And the first step is to shift your focus from what you're doing to who you're being. And so this comes down to your identity. And your identity is what drives your behavior. So this is the difference between looking at, oh, I need to eat less than 1,200 calories to I'm the kind of person who eats healthy on a consistent basis. So you can see the power in shifting to your identity, because when you come from a place of I'm the kind of person who does blank, then that is who you're being on a daily basis. And the first place that I tell people to start is to notice how you speak to yourself. What is your internal dialogue? What is the narrative that is playing around in your head? So, for example, going back to what you were talking about stepping on the scale, do you step on the scale and you see that the scale has gone up and your immediate thought is, I'm failing? Is your immediate thought, oh my God, I'm gaining weight, no matter what I do, nothing works. And you start going into that narrative of that I'm a failure, I can't lose weight. And no matter what I do, nothing works. So those are kind of like one of the 3 big narratives that I hear over and over and over again. And so what I would suggest is to start taking inventory of that narrative and shifting that narrative to come from the perspective of who do you want to be? I'm the kind of person who eats healthy consistently. I'm the kind of person who takes care of myself. I'm the kind of person whose behaviors reflect the love and respect that I have for my body. And it might take some digging to figure out what that narrative is and what it should be for you. But that's the first thing. The second thing is to understand your values. Your subconscious values are what drives you, and you don't even realize that is driving you. It's like an app that is open in the background on your phone. And it is literally dictating what you do on a daily basis, even though we don't wake up in the morning and ask, what values am I going to live from today? But yet they are driving us. So that's the second thing. And number 3 is to really understand the sensations that are happening when you are feeling cravings or triggers. And this is what I call trigger immunity. So it is really being able to be with cravings and discomfort at any time. It's just to be able to be with the experience of cravings.
And from your own personal journey, what has been like the outcomes of this change or some of the benefits that has happened to you since then? I know one thing is you started your own business and now you're coaching others so that they can get to the point, reach their goals. But what else has been some benefits for you?
The benefits are innumerable. I mean, the obvious ones are being able to lose weight and keep it off. That's the big obvious one that people can see, that's tangible. But then beyond that, it's really the way that I get to feel. I get to feel just confident. I get to feel like I can just show up and be myself. The energy that I have, because it used to be spent obsessing about food and thinking about every single thing that I was eating. So just getting back so much mental bandwidth is huge and invaluable. And then all of my relationships are 1,000% better, you know? And that was one of the most surprising benefits, to be honest with you. I never saw that one coming. But being able to be present with my husband, being able to be present with people just in general, because again, you know, so much of my mental space was consumed. It was truly consumed by thoughts about food and my body and just feeling insecure. And so being able to just be present, to be able to show up as myself unapologetically, and to be able to, and the energy, the just energy that I have, and the vigor, like, you know, the vitality that I feel in my life are all benefits that came from this.
Awesome. It's wonderful. What are some additional practices that you've put in place to just, keep you moving forward and staying consistent?
Sure. One of the biggest tools that I use is mindfulness. And, you know, mindfulness, it comes from, of course, the ancient Buddhists, but it's a tool that just allows you to really understand your brain, how your brain works. It's just being with your thoughts, observing them, and observing your emotions. This has been one of the biggest practices that I do on a daily basis, that I just stay aware of my thoughts and my feelings. You know, I frequently pause. I mean, I literally, I do it so many times. I have so many anchors that just remind me to pause. And there is so much power in just simply pausing. And I promise you, if you take 30 seconds throughout the day to just pause and just notice, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Just observe them. Just observe and not judge it. That there's so much benefit and power that it's going to give you back throughout the day. This is something that I do to this day that supports me in just staying grounded and, you know, and just being aware of where I am. And it allows me to get to the end of the day and still feel like I have gas in the tank instead of feeling like a zombie.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to have gas in the tank too.
Yeah. Don't we all?
Yeah. So for the person who might be listening to this, and if they can relate to just where you once were, and they're feeling like they're ready now, like I want to do this, Reshanda, what would you say to that person to kind of help them, take that next step?
Yeah, if you feel like you're ready, what I would say is two things. Number one is commit. Once you made the decision, you probably already know this. That doesn't mean that it's a done deal, right? Just because you're like, oh yeah, I'm ready to do this, and you jump in, like so many of us have had the experience of starting down a path and then quitting, you know? So the number one thing I would say is to commit. Now, does that mean that your journey is going to be perfect? No, it's about progress, not perfection. But once you've made the commitment in your mind, that means that you are committed to staying the course, even when things get tough, even when you do have setbacks, even when you do make mistakes and you don't do it the way that you planned. That means you're committed to getting back up, and you're not saying, okay, that didn't work. You're saying, okay, what can I learn from that? Because that's going to get me closer to what does work. So that's the number one thing I would say. Number two, I would say to really understand something called secondary gain. Because unless you understand, secondary gain is, what is the benefit of staying stuck? What is the benefit of actually staying in the behavior that I'm doing? So, for example, my benefit was, as long as I kept binge eating, I got to be the special person who, no matter what I do, nothing works. And it sounds weird, but like that was truly, or it might be staying comfortable. It might be staying safe. It might be staying in the familiar. But unless you understand what is that benefit of staying where you are, you're not going to be able to overcome the hurdle of like breaking through your comfort zone. So those are the two things that I would say. Number one is to commit. And number two is to ask yourself genuinely, what do I get from not changing?
That's a powerful question. Very powerful. And so where can individuals stay connected to you? Or if they want to, start coaching with you, where can they find you?
I am first off, I have a podcast. There's a wealth of information there on the Ending Your Binge Eating podcast. Number two is I do have a free audio that walks you through how to get through cravings without acting on them. So that's available to you. I think I already shared that link with you, but it's at reshandayates.com/cravings. Number three is I'm on social media at Reshanda Yates.
Excellent. And so, guys, you can, of course, check the show notes and links will be available so that you can stay connected to Reshanda and reach out to her. I'm sure she's open if you have any questions or.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Reshanda, for coming on the show today. I've learned a lot myself, and I appreciate you sharing your journey and your information with the audience.
Thank you so much.
All right. Until next time, guys. Ciao. Hey, Overcomers. Thanks for tuning in. For more information, head on over to DonnaCherie.com. If you want to find me online, I'm at I am Donna Cherie on Instagram and Donna Cherie on Facebook. Don't forget to join the Overcomers Confidence Club Facebook community. And of course, if you love the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes.